you have to give things time to manifest, right? Like opportunities are not going to come up immediately because you send out that request into the universe.
So excited to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just dive in. You've done a breadth of functions from product, marketing, ops, now investor, now creator. I want to hear all about it. I want to hear about what roles you loved, what roles you didn't love so much, and just tell us more about it.
Yeah, I guess it'd be helpful to maybe start at the beginning.
Yes, perfect.
I actually started my career in healthcare. Did the MCAT, did the whole bio degree, and I think right when I was about to go to med school, I realized I wasn't 100% sold on it. And in a way, tech was like my, I guess TikTok term, wackadoodle time, where I wasn't fully sold on med school, but I also wasn't sure I wasn't going to do it. So I just figured, okay, well, I don't really have job experience, and I might as well take on a few internships, explore that, and then if I don't like it, I can always go be a doctor. So
doctor was the backup plan.
Yeah, as annoying as it sounds, being a doctor was the backup plan. And actually first started in ed tech at a company called Springboard and did an internship there for a while and actually got a full-time offer I think they raised their Series B a day or two before I got my full-time offer. And at the time, it was so compelling to just take the job because it was a really tough job market. I had, a great team, really great time for the company, and I said no. And
really?
Yeah, because ops, it wasn't really something I was super excited about, but I did realize, okay, I really like working in startups and I like working in a team. So I wanted to keep doing that, but not in that role specifically. Mm-hmm. And I remember my manager being so surprised. He was like, oh my gosh, Maggie. And he gave me the whole line of, if you get a seat on a rocket ship, you should just take it.
Yeah.
And I didn't. But
And how is that company doing today? Do you regret that decision, or was that the right decision for you?
I think it was 100% the right decision for me. I don't know if it's a rocket ship, but also my manager is also no longer there.
Oh.
So
he also knows it's not a rocket ship?
Yeah. I still really believe in the mission, and I think they're doing great. But it just wasn't, back then I was really optimizing for learning as much as I could. And so the role that I was going into was just something I'm okay, I don't really think I'm going to be learning that much here, and I don't really want to spend another year doing this when I could be a lot more challenged. So then I did another internship at a company called Jump Rope, which later got acquired by LinkedIn. And there I kind of owned the entire marketing function for the travel category. So it was a social tool to help bloggers create videos because everyone was pivoting to video content. And so, we had fashion and food, and I owned the travel category. And that was a ton of learning. But that internship ended, and I was a little bit burnt out from working at super, super early stage companies. So then I took 3 months to just talk to as many people as I could, people who I thought were doing cool jobs, and just what do you like? What don't you like? Any learnings? And the result I came to was no one's really that happy in their job. And my friends and I have this joke where the best time in your life is actually the few weeks before you start your dream job. Because once you get your dream job, you quickly get acclimated to it. And then every job comes with its disadvantages and challenges. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say I've landed my dream job twice already. And they're still great. Mm-hmm. But also at the end of the day, it's also still a job. Mm-hmm. Right.
Wow. So the dream job is actually the journey to get the dream. That's really the exciting part. But then once you're in the job, you're like, well, what's my next dream?
Right, exactly. It's never meet your heroes in real life kind of thing.
Wow, that is such an interesting take. I feel as someone who has not achieved my dreams yet, it's very hard for me to understand that. I feel I have achieved things in my life that I'm very proud of that I feel like are stepping stones or critical stepping stones for like where I want to go in the future, but I haven't like not like grabbed that dream yet. So it's good to hear from you because I feel like it's helping me think about, okay, maybe I need to be more mindful about being present in the journey instead of like being obsessed with the outcome. Because when I get there, maybe it'll become old pretty fast.
Right. Yeah. And that was actually, so I make a vision board every year.
Oh
As
my
cheesy
God, really?
as it sounds.
No,
like,
that's
like
not
a
cheesy.
physical
I love
vision
that.
board with like the cutouts and the glue and everything. And on my vision board this year.
Wait, is it like physical? Like you literally cut
like a
and
poster
this?
and like scrapbooking
Yes, we
style.
go old school. I love that.
Yeah. And literally on this one, I had enjoy the process because I was thinking back at like everything that I've done. And I think when you're like very ambitious, you're always thinking like, okay, well, like what's the next thing, right? Like I'm here now, like what do I want to do next? And like looking back, it's like I've done so many things. And, you know, when I joined WeFunder, I thought, oh, this is my dream job. And like, honestly, my current role, there's like not really anything I could ask for more at a role. But then it's like, okay, well now do I want to start my own thing or do I want to do something else? And there's always going to be something. But then when you look back at like everything that you've accomplished, you're like, those were good times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes the struggle is good.
Yeah, no, and capturing those memories and looking at them positively is really important. Like sometimes I feel like I go through my day so fast because I'm like just chasing this thing and I'm like, I don't even remember. I like blacked out basically. Like I don't remember what I did. And then you can enjoy it and look like, wow, like I did that or that was really fun. Right. That was really cool. I like learned something.
Right.
Yeah. That's really interesting. What is the craziest thing that has happened to you on this journey?
I think what constantly blows my mind is like how well things have turned out. I actually just today I made this metaphor to my sister who's currently, you know, on a gap year before she goes to med school, and she's also someone who like really struggles with not having control. Right.
Wait, so your sister's going to med school, but she's actually doing it this time.
Well, I mean, my parents have 2 tries, right? And so they have 1 left, and my sister's not 100% sold, but I'm doing my best to make sure they get their doctor.
Every Asian parent's dream.
Yeah, exactly.
I get it.
And so she was struggling, and I was saying to her, I'm like, you know, if you think about life like a maze, and you're in the dark, right, and you have this tiny little flashlight, then you can only see the options that are immediately in front of you, and the best you can do is just assess and choose the one that looks the best, right? And then where you go on from there kind of depends on what you choose. Now, there are certain careers where it would be like someone giving you a map, and it's like, here's what it looks like. And it looks terrible and really hard, but at the end, you'll be a doctor, right? And I told her, I'm like, and so you can go on the set route and you know what it looks like, or you can choose to take a chance, but like, you're never going to know more than a few steps ahead of where you're going to end up. And I think for me, when I chose startups, like I didn't really have concrete skills. I didn't know how to program or do data analytics or literally any of that. And it's just crazy how many opportunities come up if you give things time and if you work at it and you kind of meet the right people and have those conversations. Because WeFunder came up because Nick and I sat next to each other at a founder dinner.
Wow.
Yeah. And like that never would have happened. And then my first job, DoorVest, was an intro from a fellow alumni who we were in the same scholarship, and their office was next to DoorVest.
That's insane. Like how do you create those opportunities for yourself? Like we always say, oh, like anyone could say, oh, you got lucky, but no, you didn't. You like manifested that luck for yourself. You put yourself in those situations to have an intro that was actually meaningful, that was going to land you to your next step. How can we create more opportunities for ourselves like that?
Yeah. So I'd say, I mean, like it all sounds like luck, right? But also what people don't see is that in the time when I was, you know, between internships and I was exploring like, okay, what do I want to do next? I was talking to probably like 3 people every single day that I had reached out to, whether it was on LinkedIn or Twitter or through a mutual connection, just to talk about their career. And it was not like, oh, I want an intro to something. It was purely, let me learn about your life and let me hear if you have any advice for someone who's trying to figure it out. And you have to give things time to manifest, right? Like opportunities are not going to come up immediately because you send out that request into the universe. And you also just have to like start saying yes to things. It was like a dinner at the end of the day, and I was tired. I'm like, oh, I don't really know if I want to go. I don't know anyone. But you still go, and then come in with an attitude of like, oh, I want to meet people and like share about myself and hear about others, and try to like bring the best of yourself to other people, because then it's so like cliche, but like the energy you put out will come back to you, right?
No, I mean, that's like so true. I feel like you need to be really open to having the right energy and mindset when you show up to these, like seizing the opportunity, right? It's like, there's like basically two things. You have to create opportunities for yourself. So that's like sending those 3 LinkedIn DMs a day, and then actually seizing the opportunity when you do it, and showing up as your best self and putting your best foot forward. Because you could play the numbers game and DM hella people, but like when it actually comes down to it, you don't show up, then it's not going to manifest in something. But if you don't also play the numbers game, you're not going to be able to create enough opportunities for yourself that you require you to show up. So it's really playing both those cards, which it feels like you knew to do that.
Right.
I have a lot of people who come to me like, I've messaged like 10, 20, 30 people, like nobody responds to me. Like, how do you get these people that you reach out to actually take that time out of their busy day and actually share more about themselves and their career for you to like learn from them?
Yeah, I think effort goes a long way. It still surprises me how many LinkedIn requests I get from like students who don't bother to attach a message to it. Every single message I sent out, I tried to personalize in some way, or at least like say like, hey, I'm Maggie, like share a little bit, because you'd be so surprised at like how few people just go like that extra like 10-second step, and it really makes a difference. But also, I mean, I remember a lot of people that never responded to me or like left me on red. And even to this day, I have this like thing about like people who received a lot of help to get to where they are but will not give it back, I think are some of like the worst kind of people, honestly, because like everybody needs help, right? And if you don't try to like pay it forward, I don't know, it just feels out of touch.
Yeah, and do you even really want advice from that kind of person anyways?
Right.
Like if they don't want to give back. I do empathize though. I get about 15, 20 DMs a day. Yeah. Like imagine if I did that all day, just talking to people, like I would fail.
Right. Yeah. And so I've had to start getting a lot more selective about like who I'm able to hop on a call with. And so, when people do put in the extra effort to like be specific about their ask, I think it's really helpful. I guess another thing is like, don't be too general about like, oh, like I just love to learn. I just love to learn, period. But having specific asks where I always maybe would be like, I really, I'm curious about this program that you were in like biotech, or like I really want to learn about what it was like starting a company straight out of college, or, how was the transition from engineering to PMing? And is it everything you ever dreamed of? That sort of thing. So I think being specific with what you're trying to learn is helpful, because then people can know like, oh, this is how I can add value to you. And when the ask is too big, I'm like, I don't really know how I'm going to help you.
Yeah. How many of these do you do a week, a month? I'm sure you get so much inbound. I can't imagine.
Well, I usually make time for like probably max 1 or 2 a week. Yeah. And then I try to answer some like asynchronously as well.
Yeah. No, that's very impressive. I feel like I think that a lot of people have that time to do that, but just don't want to do that for like pass that back and take the time out to do that. So it's like definitely very admirable. And I know that people are getting jobs and people are thinking about their careers in new ways because of these calls. Like they're very impressionable and they're very important. So you are one of someone's 30 DMs.
Yeah.
Also, the other thing is I can understand how in the beginning you were like, oh, I don't have skills, let me jump into startups, but you're clearly still at startups. You must deeply believe in them. I'm curious why. And I'm sure you can work anywhere now, right? You've built your career. What makes you bullish to like stay at startups and stay at these earlier stages of building companies?
Yeah, I will. I guess I'll give like a pretty realistic take on building at startups. I think it's incredibly easy to burn out because the rate at which you're working and like changing and always feeling not good about the work you're putting out it's so fast. Because at a startup, like if you ever feel good about your job, it probably means that like you should be working on something else, or maybe the startup.
Wait,
is
that's so
not growing
good.
fast
That's
enough.
so good what you
Yeah.
just said.
And like I think I'm at a point where like I've already gotten all the validation I need from like a career or my roles, and like I'm not worried about quitting or losing my job because it's like I know I'm employable and I have all these skills and I can just figure it out. But you know, a few years ago I would not have felt that way. I was so anxious about not feeling employable. I'm bullish on startups generally just because I think it's a really good place for young people to learn a lot in a super short amount of time. When I joined DoorVest, I joined as one of their first salespeople, which I think, by the way, like everyone should do sales. And there's such a stigma against sales because it feels like oily and gross and like inauthentic, maybe similar with like networking too. But it really taught me how to like listen to people and ask questions. And also like really address what the root of the problem is, right? And then 3 months after that, I moved into special projects, which is like another term for chief of staff. And then I later became promoted to chief of staff. And like in all those roles, I never had the right skills to actually take on that job. But at some point, you just have to be like, I'll figure it out, right? And from there, you know, you do marketing and success, and you do a little bit of product, and you learn analytics. And I think it's just so good because when you're young, you don't know really what you like or what you don't like. Like most is what you've heard from other people, and some things seem very glamorous and some don't. So it's almost like the sampler platter of careers if you do startups. I think the drawback is you're not going to have a lot of guidance, and you're not necessarily going to have someone like holding your hand and being like, oh, you're doing great, or like, oh, you're not doing great. And I think it takes a certain amount of resilience to be able to thrive in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like with startups specifically, a lot of young people are afraid to start their careers there.
Yeah.
And there's often this notion of you should start at a big tech company. You should start at a name brand because that'll like lift you for the rest of your career. 2 startups later when it's like less risky for you.
Right. I actually just had a friend say that yesterday when we were talking.
Really?
Yeah, where I think like, I mean, when you're young, there are certain things that you're not going to be good at, right? Like, I'd say in my first few internships, there were many things that I wasn't necessarily good at, like being proactive about stuff. Because when you're young, you're kind of waiting for someone to tell you like, oh, what should I do, right? But at a startup, you should be like looking. I mean, like, where can I add value? What is not good? And like, what can I do about it? And that's something that can be taught. So I'm actually of the philosophy that like hustle mentality and like grinding can be taught. You just need to be put in the right environment, like with a few people you can emulate for a little bit, and you'll pick it up pretty quickly.
How does someone avoid getting burnt out, specifically consistently going from one startup to the next, right? Work-life balance is probably really difficult.
Yeah. I would say like have a hobby, one or two. You probably won't have more time for 2 or more. But I'd say like generally just like keeping on top of your wellness, so like sleeping and eating well and that sort of thing. But also like if I think like if you're doing startups properly, you're always going to feel some much larger than average amount of responsibility for how things are going at the company because like you are such a large part of the company.
And your success is their success.
Exactly.
And vice versa.
Exactly. And it's very much sink or swim. Like if the startup does not grow, like everyone is out of a job eventually. So you have to keep moving, and it's not really a place where you can coast. But I would say like having some sort of outlet for yourself, and then being able to take a step back and like recognize that like some things are out of your control, I think is helpful. Another is a lot of startups have unlimited PTO. which depending on which startup you're at can be used well or very poorly. So, taking time off and recognizing that there's never going to be a good time to take time off. And that, like, you can get a signal on how, like, PTO is treated at a company by how often the leadership takes time off as well.
That's actually really good advice. I do think that could be toxic because I'm a toxic founder who does not take any time off, but I want to encourage the people that work for me to do that.
Totally.
So I hope they do not emulate me. But that's like a good framework for people who are like thinking about starting a startup, seeing what's right for me, is actually looking at the founder and seeing how do they live their day-to-day, how do they show up for work, because that's going to be representative of the company.
Yeah, and if leadership takes time off, other people under them will feel like they're allowed to take time off, because if your manager's working all the time, you might feel like you have to keep up and like not go on vacation.
Yeah. I like what you said earlier though, like have 1 or 2 hobbies, because and honestly I think I need to listen to that advice, because classic founder, like my hobby is my work. So I need to like figure that out. But like, what are your hobbies?
My hobbies are like, I feel like right now my hobbies are just like finishing up adulting things. So I recently moved from Pittsburgh to LA actually just last week, and leading up to that, I bought a house in Pittsburgh and I was renovating it for the better part of a year. And so really my hobby outside of work was like painting walls and replacing dishwashers and like wrangling contractors. And so that was a different type of stress, but it gets my mind off of work. And then
that makes sense.
And then we were also moving, so my hobby was just like packing boxes and stuff. And also my fiance and I are engaged and we have to wedding plan, so that's like another thing. So I think like none of these are fun or like hobbies, but just like having something else to do to focus on, and then eventually like I'll go back to normalcy and do hobbies. So like I love dancing and I love roller skating, and I think I'm gonna go pick up some quail this week, like the birds. I wanted chickens.
I was not expecting you to say that.
I really love animals, and I wanted chickens, but I had to compromise, so we're getting quail.
Oh my God, that's adorable.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, congrats on your engagement.
Thank you.
How do you balance being a startup and your relationships?
It's definitely been a struggle in the past where sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm spending so much time working that like we haven't been able to have like quality time or really just like focus on each other. And also I think you might relate to this, but when you have Slack on your phone, you're constantly getting pings. And so I've started just leaving my phone at home when we go out to like run groceries, or when we're just like chatting, I'll just leave my phone.
When you're with your partner.
Yeah.
That's really smart.
Yeah, so I'll just leave it very far away. And I think it's been better. My partner's also a bit of a workaholic, so he relates. But I think we're actually pretty good about it now.
What are your thoughts on workaholic couples?
I think it works for you. It works for you. I mean, like work-life balance is different according to each person, right? Like some people code all day and then when they're off work, they code for fun. And I think that's okay. Like if that's your idea of enjoyment and relaxation, like do whatever you want, right? Like for Yi and I, what we love is like we love to like sit down and like explore ideas of businesses or like products that we think are cool and like would be fun to work on together. Or, sometimes we'll just watch Netflix. But I think like as long as you both are happy for it, then go for it.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm in a workaholic relationship for sure. Same.
Yeah.
My boyfriend's also a founder.
Right.
So like sometimes Friday night we'll look at each other and like we could go to a party or we could just work, and we're like more excited about that. And like just even sitting together and working together, like it's like that's kind of quality time.
Right.
But a lot of my friends will be like, that's really unhealthy and toxic. Like you need to like do XYZ instead, or you should not spend time with your partner talking about work all the time. I'm like, but what if like it feels good to me and it feels nurturing to me that we're nurturing each other's careers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Kind of like what you said.
Right. Like one crazy thing we did last year over Christmas was we did all the interior decoration for a friend's Airbnb. And I actually wouldn't recommend that. Very stressful, very short timeline. It's over the holidays, but we worked on that together. And in hindsight, I think it was kind of fun. But like that's our idea of like something that we would do in our free time.
Right. Like add work to your plate and
Yeah,
take on a project.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally get that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like to each their own. I think that where the problem arises is when you're working crazy hours and that doesn't align with your partner's expectations, where maybe they're at a job that they don't have to work overtime, or maybe their priorities are different, right? Which is totally reasonable. There's no like right answer to this. But then you have mismatched values.
Yeah.
I think that causes problems. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, like you're saying, but it's about finding that person that's on like the same level as you in terms of what they want for their life, which is hard.
Right. And I also think like it's okay to make adjustments, right? Like there are times when I'm working too much and then we need to talk about like, hey, we need to like set time aside for us. Or I'll be like, hey, I don't like it when you're working like till 4 a.m. We have to go to bed and then we have to make, and so I think like compromising is totally normal, but like you just kind of have to do what works for you two when you talk about it.
I mean, you've had so much startup experience. The thing that I keep thinking about that I'm going to blurt out now is like, why haven't you started your own company?
It's definitely like I used to think that I never wanted to be a founder, like never, ever, 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 just because I think on the outside it feels so glamorous and it's like, oh, you like start your own company, you have your own team, etc. But it also means that you're underpaid, you're responsible for everyone. And like when things go terribly, it's all on you. So it's just like you feel the most extremes of emotions, the ups and downs, and it's mostly downs. And when it's up, it lasts for 5 minutes, and then you're on to like the next fire.
Can attest that is all true and factual.
Exactly. It's like it's a really, really difficult, thankless job, and you know, like the glamour of like being a founder, it like wears off so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, there is no glamour, right? Like, if you're not doing it for whatever it is that you want to, whatever that change is that you want to see in the world, it is not a good idea to be a founder. Like, there's not that much upside here, guys.
Right. And like, you shouldn't be a founder to like get rich either, because most companies do not make you massively wealthy, but you just got to really believe in it. And so I worked pretty much like directly with the CEO for almost all my past startups. And so I saw all that and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I would never want this for myself. Even being at a startup and like managing people is hard enough. But now I'm also at that point where I'm like, okay, well, I've done the, 9 to 5 thing and everything about my job is really great. But like, I think it would be fun to build something. And I actually have like in my notes, like a running list of ideas of things that I think would be cool.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Exactly. And so like, I don't know, like maybe like ideally, I think the sweet spot would be like, I run like a profitable small business. And
dude, I've been thinking so much about this. I feel like the venture-backed business, I've drank that Kool-Aid my entire life drinking the Bay Area, and I don't even know if it's not really that lucrative actually in theory.
It's not.
I feel like the person who like aims for that small business ends up being happier and wealthier in the end.
Yeah.
Which is a hot take.
My dream is like a successful Etsy store where you can just be creative and like everyone loves your products. Yeah. And you can just like have fun.
No, I literally, I feel you so hard right now. I've been thinking about this so much.
Yeah, so definitely like a thought I have now, but kind of just still like marinating on some ideas until I like have it more fleshed out or like just feel like incredibly passionate enough about it that I'll like do it. Yeah.
How do you carve time out in your day to think about this idea, think about making progress on it? Is it like an organic thing? Do you actually set aside time?
Yeah, not necessarily. Like, I think thoughts will come up, like, in conversations, and some of them are, like, really dumb ideas, right? And then others are really good, and then I'll just write them all down. And then sometimes when I can't sleep, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go through my notes and, like, see, like, what things I love and if I have any new thoughts about it.
Yeah.
But then there are also things that I make deliberate time for. So like with content creation, I try to, make 1 or 2 a week. Also right now I've been kind of doing more YouTube. And so the goal there is to like do 1 a week. And because I think sometimes it's just like having stuff out there, even if it's not good or perfect. Like I don't know my niche. I don't really know what I want to put on there yet. It's nice to just get started and then you'll figure it out, right? And like that's how startups work too. Like you don't exactly know what your product is going to look like from inception, but the more feedback you get, the kind of more bats you have, eventually your ugly baby is going to turn into something presentable.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it also, every day that you put yourself out there and create content, you're just becoming like 10 times better of a creator and 10 times better of understanding and getting closer to like what is your niche and like how you want to go put yourself out there. But like curious how, like, what was that moment where you're like, I'm going to start creating content and do this? Because it's obvious you have like 15,000 things on your plate. Like this is not like I'm bored situation.
Right. Well, I actually started during COVID just because I thought it was really fun. So it was more like humor-y stuff. And it was also around the time when I was like just kind of getting into tech and like learning about it. So it was more for fun. And then recently I picked it back up again because I realized that so many people on TikTok or like in general were misinformed about startups where they were conflating that with big tech. And because you see a lot of big tech creators filming like day in my life or like, oh, how large my salary is, or kind of making tech maybe appear a little bit more glamorous. And people will think that if you work in startups, it's the same way. And it's very, very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to share more of that. And then sometimes when I get a little bit too real, people are like, oh my gosh, that is crazy. And why would anyone ever want to do that? And so there's that too. But at least it's out there. And so I have gotten a lot more, hopefully I've gotten more students like reach out to me about like exploring startups, which I think was the goal. But yeah, I think just like having more perspectives out there about like your career options and what tech looks like, whether it's big tech or startups or like smaller tech focused business, like they don't all look the same across the spectrum.
Yeah, and I'm sure so many people follow you because they want to learn from you specifically and like how are you experiencing life, right? And so it doesn't really matter if you know exactly what your niche is. As you show up and share more about who you are and what you know, like people are going to want to follow you along your life, right? But if you're not consistently showing up, then people will drop off. So it's like you're doing that right now. And I deeply believe that like the next era founders are creators first. So you're 10 steps ahead for when you're ready to take the plunge.
Yeah. See, I'm, what's that? Where you're kind of just like putting stuff out there and like opportunities will come up. Also kind of why I moved to LA because I love that everyone's kind of doing something a little bit different. It's not as tech focused as SF is. So, I'm not 100% positive I want to build in tech in the future, but I kind of just love being around a diversity of ideas and people pursuing things that matter to them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I really love LA, very obsessed with it, and I don't go there enough. So I'm thinking maybe I move to LA. Yeah. I've been hearing a lot of really good things recently about specifically the tech ecosystem and how it's different than SF, and it's not. Like SF, I feel like there's one type of person, there's one type of good idea. I think LA has like more of like diversification of ideas and people are more open-minded to like all the different ways it can go. I know you've been to SF many times, right? Yeah. Maybe, I don't know if you've lived here.
I lived here.
Oh, you lived here?
Yeah.
Okay, then this is going to be a perfect question, but I want to know like your take on SF versus LA and like what do you think like is better for a certain type of person and why did you leave SF and why did you eventually pick LA?
Yeah, so I moved to SF for my job because when you're chief of staff, like you're just working with the CEO, and so it made sense for us to be in the same physical location. I think I generally did not enjoy living in SF. And I feel like that's maybe just a polarizing take. I feel like you either love SF or you hate it. And for me, it was about kind of the environment, where I think I worked in the financial district, and so every day walking from, Nob Hill to FIDI, it's only 15 minutes, but you see a lot of crime. You get chased down on the streets sometimes. You can get like harassed, like verbally, and it just doesn't feel very safe. And people will say like, oh, well, that's only certain parts of SF. But also SF is a city where you go up a street and it's safe, and then you go down a street and it's not.
Also, that is where you needed to live because that's where you work. Right. So you can't control that.
Yeah. And I think the other was like, I'm someone who loves exploring and doing things, and I just found it so hard to move around in SF, where without a car, it's hard to get places. BART takes forever, and you can't just Uber everywhere. But if you have a car, you're always worried about getting broken into. And then I got 2 tickets in 2 days when I moved to SF because of street cleaning and like not turning my wheels the right way. And so there are things like that. And I've had friends like have their cars fully set on fire. And I didn't even realize how I didn't even realize it took space on me mentally until I moved to Pittsburgh. And I could walk my dog at like 11 p.m. in the alleyway and feel totally safe.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, girl, I feel you on all that. I've gotten my car broken into. I've gotten so many tickets. I have not had a car and had to rely on public transportation, and that has failed. I've had a car and that has failed. Yeah. I also am a huge sun person. Like, sun existing is fully kind of catered to like how I show up in the morning. Like, am I happy or sad? Yeah. So there's not that much sun in SF. So I do feel that I have this like very unhealthy relationship with SF, where some days I love it and some days I literally hate it. And I also grew up nearby, so I've had this unhealthy relationship my entire life with SF. But something about the tech ecosystem like keeps bringing me back here, even when all these things about the city itself, like I don't love. Like, all these problems are solved in LA and New York and these other cities. Not all of them, but like there's a solution to every problem in another city. Right. So then I'll like complain a lot about SF and be like, just go move there. I was like, I can't explain to you. It's like a toxic relationship. But I totally agree with your perspective. It makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people come to SF with romanticizing it and then show up here and realize it's not this like perfect city they thought it was. It definitely has its pros, but it has its cons too.
Yeah, I think the people really make SF. Like, I've met some of the best people I've ever known in SF, and I think if you're really trying to build like a very tech focused startup, it's still probably one of the best places to be. And I think it's also a great place to like start your career too, just like meet like-minded, excited, ambitious people. But at least for me, definitely not like a long-term play.
Totally. I mean, what you said, like-minded, that's critical. Yeah. I love New York. I lived there for 2 years. I felt like it solved all my problems that SF had. I struggled to meet like-minded people. I can't explain it. Like, the women in tech ecosystem is like much more scattered there. Of course it exists, but SF's so much smaller, and that community is so much more dense here. Yeah. Felt it a lot easier for me to find people and then connect with them. And you can't argue, like, you connect on the basis of career. That is a real thing to connect on, right? You connect on a lot of other things too, and you don't have to connect with someone on your job. But I felt like that was something that was really important to me, to connect with people on that aspect. And I really struggled to find that with other people outside of SF, which was surprising for me. I didn't realize that, especially when I graduated. I moved to SF first before I did a stint in New York, and so I kind of jumped right into the ecosystem of a bunch of like-minded people. I was like, no, it's so easy to make friends. Like, I didn't realize I was like this everywhere. Yeah, so I learned that later. But you're also an investor, which is like, let's just like tack that onto all the amazing, incredible things you've done in your career. How do you balance that with everything you do? How did you get involved in that?
Yeah, so another example of how like just doing things that matter to you will kind of lead to more opportunities. The general partner of Potluck Ventures is Eric Lim, and we like had some mutuals in kind of like Asian founder, Asian investor space, but he is also a creator on TikTok. And so we connected there, and I had wanted to get more into growth stage investing because I'd spent a lot of time in early and seed stage, and he did more like Series B and beyond. And I think maybe this is a trend with people with a heavier finance background too. Like once a company gets to like Series B plus, they have real financials and projections to look at. Whereas before, a lot of it is a little bit more hand wavy and like selling the idea. So I wanted to get more into that side of investing. So we started working together. We did a few deals together. And that is much more like part-time. So I'm not like an investor and I'm not doing it as a career, but more I'm investing in companies that I think are like going places and building things that matter. So that's that side of that.
Wait, new question, but like what does it mean to invest with someone? Like in practice, like what does that look like and how, like what if I want to invest on the site, or like I have no idea, where would I even begin? Like what would I do? I'm not wealthy. I don't have any money to give, right? So but I do think I am surrounded by a lot of founders all the time who are building insane things. And so I feel like there is some value I can bring, but I have like no idea how to pitch myself or put myself out there.
Right. And I think this is something that has come up as a topic more frequently, and I really love it because we have this term called poor angels, where, you know, an angel investor is someone who just like writes a personal check, right? And oftentimes you want these checks to be like 50,000 or more, or like 10,000 even or more. But a lot of people who are, you know, founders or working in startups, you don't have that kind of money, but you still want to like support
me.
Yeah, exactly. and so the typical check size that maybe you could write is like $1,000 to $5,000, right? And oftentimes you will need a little bit of like social capital to have a founder do it, because then they're really just doing it to you as a favor, right? Like no one is really like losing sleep over $1,000 to $5,000. But I started because Andrew, the CEO of DoorVest, was writing these really small checks into companies. I was like, okay, that's fascinating. I want to do it. So there's ways where you can just write it in and you can do like a SAFE, which is basically a contract where it's like, I'll give you money now, and then when you raise, I'll get some equity. Or you could join as part of an SPV. So some people will lead like groups of angels, and then you pool your money together, and then they write like one large check, and it shows up as one line on the cap table. So that's another option. But I think the barriers to entry there are a little bit higher. And generally you have to be an accredited investor.
So you do still need like some sort of money in your bank account, right? Like, is there a way to provide value other than money? Maybe it's through deal flow, community, you know, brand.
Yeah. So like, I mean, if you want to just like help out, then you can do all these things, right? And I think what I found really helpful is like giving people examples of what you can help them with. So one thing is like, oh, I, you know, run a TikTok with an audience of investors, and I'm happy to share your company on my TikTok. Or like, oh, I run a newsletter, I'm happy to write about it or feature it. Or like, oh, if you're looking for a hire, I have tons of people trying to find a job, I can intro you, right? So those are examples. But then if you actually want to be an investor, then you'd have to write a small check, which kind of brings me to like WeFunder, where I think if you want to get into investing, I think investing through a like a portal like WeFunder is the best way, because it's the only way that an unaccredited investor, so someone who doesn't have a net worth of $1 million or makes under $250K a year, can invest in private companies. And the smallest check size you can write there is $100. So it's so
I got $100.
Exactly. You got $100. And so it's like you get the most learning per dollar out of those, and you're still investing in companies, and like there are often like YC deals or like venture back deals, and it's the same pitch deck. You can still, you know, interact with a founder and ask questions and like kind of dip your toes in the investing waters, and then when you're a little bit wealthier, you can graduate to like writing your own checks.
That makes sense. What was the first check that you wrote?
The first check I wrote was actually into DoorVest.
No way.
Yeah. So I wrote.
That's a good story.
Yeah, I wrote $1,000 check into DoorVest on a safe, and I'm like, I have no idea what a safe is, but I know this.
And this was before you started working there, or during your time there?
It was, I think like right around when I just started. Yeah.
You know, you've hired a good employee when they like want to pay the company they're working for.
Yeah.
That is epic. Very cool. Well, that honestly was very useful for me. I feel like I think about investing a lot, but I have like no idea how to get started. But but WeFunder is like, sounds like the perfect place. Like, you don't need money. You know, you can learn. It feels like one of the biggest patterns I'm seeing is like, you're very pro, like, learn by doing. And it's something that I actually really believe in as well. I feel like I've also like gone to school, have a cool degree that like is supposed to get me all these fancy jobs, right? But then I kind of feel like the stuff that I have landed has been learning from my own doing outside of school and kind of just showing up and being okay with not knowing how to do this scary hard thing in front of me. And in a way, that's kind of what WeFunder is saying is, hey, do the scary hard thing of spending your money, because the best way to learn is just doing the actual thing, right? Rather than sitting and thinking about it. It's like hard to learn that way.
Right. It almost forces you to learn, because it's like, oh, if I sign up for a workout class, I have to go because I paid for it.
It's a great example.
Right?
I love that example.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, I invested in this company now, so I have to look at all the details. Well, usually you look at the details before you invest, but you're like, I'm committing to learning about this.
Yes. And that makes sense. What is your take on like the education system and where it's going, especially because it's hard to learn by doing in like traditional school settings, right? And I mean, the most practical, obvious way, right, is like internships. One, they can only happen when you're not in school, or just like it gets tough to manage. Right. And also like companies, especially in these bad markets, are not really giving internships so easily. So a lot of these students are put in these tough positions where they understand like learning by doing is really important, which is better off than most people. Most people don't even understand that. And it's like, that's kind of hopeless. Sorry. But they understand that concept, and then they are really doing the work to try to get the internship. They're doing all the things that we say work, you know, doing the DMs, showing up, being present, and they're not landing. Like, how do we fix that? How do we change them? How do we help them?
I guess like I have perspective both like from a company side and also as a former student. I think the reason why a lot of startups don't offer internships for young people is because they need a lot of guidance, right? Like someone like training someone who has never had a job before, I need to like teach you how to even communicate with me, or like teach you how to, you know, write down what you did, or like do the thing. And so it requires a lot of guidance. And at startups, like you're running so lean already, you don't necessarily have the time or resources to like train someone from zero. And then also sometimes internships are short. So then the second you get them trained, then they're like back to school, and that's really tough. WeFunder offers co-ops, which are 6 months. And I think those are really good, but also a lot of schools, there's not that much flexibility for a co-op.
Like you basically have to take a semester off at that point.
Exactly.
Which I honestly think like more people should do this.
Yeah, 100%.
It makes so much sense. What people don't realize is like that extra semester you have to take in college to graduate on time, like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah,
like, but that extra 6 months that you have of experience is a huge deal when you're getting your first job. It shows this person has consistently showed up and at a job and actually demonstrated their skills and built upon what they know, so that they're much more qualified.
Yeah, and I think it does so much for you as a student too, where like you gain confidence in like your working style, and you get a much better idea of like what you want to do too. But I think when you're young, you're so worried about like falling behind and like taking the right step, because I remember when I graduated, I felt like my next step was so critical and was going to decide whether I was successful or not for like the rest of my life.
For sure. But we need to start normalizing that not having experience on a resume is an opportunity cost of your time, and that is more critical than like not taking a class when your friends are taking a class, right? Yeah. So that makes sense. What's a piece of advice you would tell your younger self if you could go back in time and talk to her?
I don't really have a lot of regrets in my life, but I feel like
love that.
If I were to do something over again, I would major in computer science, and I would also major in English. And I think I actually wanted to make a longer video about this, where I have this like grid in my head of like how you should choose your major in college, where like you should choose something useful. And I say useful generally as in like something that like people will look at it and be like, oh, that is an employable major, right? And if you really want something that you enjoy, then maybe take it as a minor or a double major in it. And so there's like a sliding scale of like how useful something is and like how much you enjoy, and ideally it's both. But if you can't have both, then like, try to like find some sort of balance there.
Yeah. That's interesting because you can, if you do the major and minor with that strategy, you can potentially find an intersection where it's like you're doing what you love that's actually useful and employable, which is like the gold mine of jobs. Like we're all running to find that for ourselves.
Right. And one of the biggest, like one of the books I love is like Range, or like why generalists thrive in a specialist world. And it talks about how like many of the most successful people have had like a plethora of past experiences. Because you just have more interesting perspectives and you're more creative and you think of things that other people don't. And like, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm super specialized in anything, right? Like I was a photographer in college, I did a biomed, I also did supply chain and Chinese, and then like none of which are really that helpful for my career right now. But I think they've also like all given me opportunities for things, or like allowed me, or like given me an attitude about just like trying new things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Curious why you think computer science is still like really important. I know a lot of people say, oh, like AI is going to take their job. Like don't do engineering. Yeah. Especially because I mean, I don't think you weren't a software engineer at any point. Right. Like, is that a job you wanted? Like, what's the logic behind computer science specifically?
Yeah, so for me, it's not necessarily. I think like it definitely would have helped employability, and I'm not saying that engineering it's going to be that way forever. I think a few years ago maybe consulting or banking was like the really hot job, and now it's like PM and engineering perhaps, and like in a few years it'll change. And so like just for me at the time where we were, CS would have been a good choice, and also like I generally
for that era of the world.
Yeah. And like it's also just like a useful skill to have, like understanding how products are built and like why certain things are possible and aren't. And also like for me, like I love making things. Like I love crafting, and like for me, like programming is just another way of building things. And to have that ability to like, come up with like a silly little game or like a silly little app, like that's still fun for me.
No, I get what you're saying. I actually realized this in my junior year of college, and I like hacked away at a CS minor and like a software engineering internship to like bootstrap that skill on my resume, because I was like, oh wait, it doesn't matter if I don't want to be an engineer like full time and long term. This is actually very critical to having the skills and understanding of what it means to be an engineer, and that helped me land my dream job of being a product manager, which all those skills in total make me good at building the company that I'm building today. So no regrets there. So I totally get that. But I think it's oftentimes kind of difficult to be like, I'm going to do all this work for this like abstract potential thing that's like kind of help me in the gaps. It's very tricky.
Yeah.
So I do get what you're saying. And I do think that at that point doing that is the reason that everything that I've done today is because I had that one skill, right? It wasn't the 4 years that I did. It was actually that like one semester that I like grinded lead code and like tried to get a job. But
right. Like my general philosophy is like, you're never going to regret something that helps you become a more interesting person or helps you understand something more deeply. Like right now I'm considering like, oh, I think I'm just going to go get my real estate agent's license. Partially because I'm trying to buy a house in LA.
That's really cool.
So like, oh, we can save some money. But also, like, okay, like that's just a good skill to have. Like, I'd love to understand housing more, and like now I have this extra door that I can do in the future for like something.
Another tool in your tool belt, and maybe you realize some like crazy problem in the real estate market, and then you can go and personally solve it. But if you had not gone and done that, then you wouldn't know. Like you never know where that could take you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think like, in this day and age, like lots of things have been changing with like AI and no code and so much about the day-to-day engineer's job. So if you were in college today, would the answer still be computer science in English?
Yeah, I think so. Like, not that I think, because I think like AI and machine learning is going to really change the world that we live in, but like, that's still programming, right? Like you still have to understand that. And like tech really powers the world we live in now. And so like software engineering, like to some degree is always going to be relevant. And so for me, I'd still want to understand that.
Yeah,
and, like,
I
speak
totally
that language, right?
Totally agree with you. I do think it's so important. And I definitely think that the way my skills have manifested for my career would be different in today's day, but like for sure relevant.
Yeah.
Like engineers are the ones building these AI models, so
Right.
makes sense. Cool. Well, that was like so informal. Like I feel like I have so many practical skills now to take back. Where can we find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. My handle's pretty much the same everywhere. It's just Maggie Zheng. TikTok, Instagram, the same. On Twitter, I had to give an underscore after mine because someone took it. Typical.
Classic. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't even try with my name.
Avni. Oh, do you get it?
It's one of those names that like so short that it's like some combination of those 4 letters. Just somewhere else take it. So I'm like, I'm not even gonna try.
I know.
Yeah.
It's fine. But yeah, you can always find me on those places. And then I recently started YouTube. No idea what I'll make there yet, but it's there if you're interested.
Cool. Well, maybe we can get some comments that asking what you should make videos about.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Yes, leave your comments. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. This was so amazing.